Hello, my creative friends! Today, we're checking out one of the most modern pencils we've ever seen. This brand is famous for their excellence, innovation, and vast color range in watercolor paint, that is, and the go-to for many artists, myself included. A company that continues to innovate with the surprise release of these pencils way back in 2018, making them one of the more modern pencils we've had the pleasure to play with. Everyone, please welcome the Winsor and Newton Studio Collection Colored Pencils. This very exciting and, to be fair, absolutely intriguing kit of pencils has been burning a hole in my hot little hands for a while now. It's been sitting on my shelf just waiting for me to open it up. I have very high expectations for the Winsor and Newton, and I'm very curious to see how these pencils go. So let's waste no time and start by taking a closer look at the pencils themselves. This is the Winsor and Newton Studio Collection Colored Pencil 48 pack. First thing you'll notice is this really unappealing plastic packaging. It's very secure, very thick, and very ugly. It's actually a real struggle to get it off and into the actual pencils. Finally, when I do, we can see there is a cardboard sleeve that covers the pencils holding them together. The cardboard sleeve really doesn't have much of interest on it other than the Winsor and Newton logo and a little bit of info on what is in the pack. I had a horrible thought here that I was going to have to save the cardboard sheath to keep the pencils together, but thankfully no, there is a tin lid under the pencils. Both the lid and the base are a very simple silver tin. The lid has a raised Winsor and Newton stamp which looks and feels very classy. Opening the tin up, we have the pencils. They are striking and sit comfortably in the black tray with indents in the sides so we can get access to the row beneath. The tray the pencils sit in is quite deep, but the separator between the pencils is quite shallow. I suspect if you didn't have a full kit, then these pencils could and would roll around in the kit. The look of this pencil pack is understated, very much keeping in line with the Winsor and Newton style. The only color really on display is coming from the pencil ends, which are nice and vibrant. The website is simple and colourful with quite a lot of information about Winsor and Newton's products. When you make your way to the pencil section, we have bold pictures and quite a bit of information about the pencils. The set I have is available in 12, 24 and 48 pencils, and again I can see they've actually changed up their branding and packaging since I bought my pencils. This new design is much nicer and much more elegant than what I have here. One of the things that's available on the site that isn't in this kit is a colour swatch for the pencils. Hopefully this is in the new packaging, but it's currently not in this kit, and it's a bit of an oversight from Winsor and Newton. The pencils themselves are a round barreled pencil and they are very unique looking. Winsor and Newton's name has a reputation for quality and these pencils continue with that feel. The pencils are very elegant with the sleek grey design on the barrel and the colour indicated on each of the pencils with a vibrant large swatch on the end. They are made from Californian cedar wood. The length of the overall pencil is 175mm from tip to tail, and the diameter of the pencil is a slimmer than normal 7.2mm. The core of these pencils is a wax-based core, rolling in at 3.7mm. Finally, a minimalist pencil design. The design of these pencils is really quite lovely. The pencil is a sky grey in colour, which makes it feel and look unique and modern. The pencil texturally feels slim, sleek, and as far as a pencil can be, sexy. From the very vibrant core, the barrel is smooth and pleasant until we come to a real silver Winsor and Newton logo, followed by the pencil's colour in black font, and finally, a large vibrant colour swatch. The pencil has a curved shaped end, which feels like the colour is layered on by dipping each pencil in paint. It's remarkably seamless to the end swatch. With the Winsor and Newton pencils, I think you can already tell I'm immediately liking the look of them overall. They are elegant, with a minimalist design and feel unique with a frankly interesting look. There really isn't a huge amount that a pencil manufacturer can ever do to make a pencil really different from the competition. So seeing one like this that has made such a striking design choice as the grey is great to see. Something that's well designed is just so appealing. Even if the plastic and the cardboard sleeve on the packaging was a bit of a turn-off, the pencils themselves definitely make up for that. They are thinner than average for what I'd consider artist pencils, but that just means they feel like they're floating in my hand. But that said, these pencils may actually be too light. I'm curious as to whether with usage, they're going to end up being a strain on the hand. So that's the physical side of our Winsor and Newton pencils. Let's throw our series of tests at them and see if they're actually any good. Our first test today is of course the saturation and vibrancy test. Here we look at how bright and how saturated the colour these pencils can produce are, and how consistent that is across various weights. Consistency is really important in a pencil. On an excellent pencil, we can expect to have obvious steps towards a more vibrant saturation as our pressure becomes heavier and heavier. A lot of factors will contribute to these results, including the hardness of the lead, the composition of the core, but also how vibrant the different coloured pigments used in these pencils are. The Winsor and Newton is a wax-based pencil, and it tends to be the norm that wax-based pencils have a soft core. That usually means they put down a lot of colour quicker and are great for creating bright and saturated colours. But we've had a couple of pencils recently that have been wax-based and haven't performed, shall we say, quite as well as we would have liked. I'm very interested to see how these go. Because we can't test every pencil in these packs, I'm going to pick 4 colours from each kit, plus our dominant black and white. We'll run the test on each of these and compare the results for an average score. The colours I've chosen for the Winsor and Newton are red, red, green, green, blue, azure, yellow, yellow, white, and black. For this test, we're going to draw with our pencils at 5 different pressures: 25 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams, 200 grams, and 400 grams. So light to heavy. As always, I'm using my kitchen scales here so we can expect these numbers to jump around a little bit. And for you paper people out there, I'm using basic white multimedia paper for these tests. Let's go see what happens, shall we? We're going to start off this test today as per usual with our 25 gram weight. 25 grams is not a lot of weight, so realistically, we're not expecting the pigment to have a lot of intensity here. Starting off with our red pencil and very lightly applying that pressure. That's quite vibrant for our first weight. All right, let's try a green now. This is going down very similar to the red, and at this weight, it's kind of what I was expecting for the wax-based pencils. With our blue, we can see that it's very consistent with the green and red. Onto our yellow. Yellow is often difficult to see at this 25 gram weight because it is so light. It's gone down fairly vibrant, but really not as much as the others. The black is definitely a lot more saturated than the other colors. It's quite intense here at the 25 gram weight. Stepping into the 50 grams, we can see that the saturation and vibrancy has definitely doubled in the red. The green in the 50 grams seems very similar. I really don't think the blue has doubled here, perhaps 75%, and so too has that yellow. It's increased but not doubled. Whereas the black is turning out to be quite a dark black, but like the blue and yellow, I'd say it's not doubled. Let's see what happens at the 100 grams. As our red goes onto the paper at the 100 grams, it actually doesn't look like it's changed all that much from the 50 grams to the 100 grams. The green is a little better, but still not as much of an increase in that vibrancy and saturation as I was hoping for. Our blue looks nearly the same as the 50 grams, except just a bit denser. While our yellow is getting more saturated and vibrant, it's only so much that we can see it better. If we have a little look at the black here, we can see it is increased, but again, I don't think it's doubling. Onto our 200 grams. Our red honestly looks very similar to the 100 grams. It has gotten denser here, but it's very similar. However, the green does look like it's doubled and also feels much denser here at the 200 grams. The blue too looks much more vivid here at the 200 grams, like someone's finally flicked the saturation switch and it's doubled. Our yellow is more saturated here, but I don't think it's as much as the green and the blue. However, if we look at how it's built up over the 4 swatches of color, we can see it's climbing in saturation pretty consistently. Black has finally started to get more saturated here at the 200 gram weight. It's going to be interesting to see what these pencils do at the 400 grams and our weightiest weight. Okay, wow. I was not expecting that. Our saturation and vibrancy for the red pencil has just exploded. Our green is also ridiculously more saturated and vibrant here. With the blue, we have definitely pumped up the volume, but I don't think it's quite as much as the red and green. The yellow here doesn't really feel like it's gone up in saturation and vibrancy much, although it does feel denser. And that black though. Interestingly, the black has really stepped up on this 400 gram weight. It's also worth noticing how dark that black is. It's a really great color. Let's have a look at our white pencil now. Starting off with the 25 grams, it's coming down very light, which for a wax-based pencil is honestly great. Onto our 50 grams, we can see that the saturation and vibrancy has gone up a little, possibly doubled, maybe not quite a doubling. We definitely don't have as much of an increase from the 50 gram to the 100 gram, but we make a little bit of that back from the 100 gram to the 200 gram, as we've had a nice increase. At the 400 grams, like the other colors, this pencil really dominates. It's a very saturated and vibrant white at this weight. That was the saturation and vibrancy test. I'm actually pretty pleased with these pencils. The consistency in the Winsor and Newton is very good. The red and the green are particularly consistent with a smooth step up in saturation at each different weight. At high pressures, the 400 gram particularly, the colors are very saturated and vibrant, which is very impressive. Whereas the blue, yellow and black aren't quite as good, they're still okay and we can see improvement in saturation at each pressure, but they don't jump up as consistently as I'd like. Throughout, the colors are strong and vibrant, and the black is one of the blackest blacks I've seen, which is excellent. Our white is a bit strange. It's done extremely well in this test, but doing this test, it just felt so strange. It feels like a soft pencil, softer than the others actually, but it's scratchy like a hard pencil. Strange. One thing I will say across the board with these is they do suffer a little at the light weight. It's a problem with wax pencils, they often lack a lighter end, and that's pretty much represented here. Initial thoughts are that these pencils are very comfortable to use, although the core is a tiny bit scratchy on the paper. It's also very easy to use these pencils. Their thick texture is easy to control as the pencil moves across the paper. Currently, the thinness isn't causing any problems. So let's rank the pencil for saturation and vibrancy. Looking at how these 6 colors perform together and averaging them across this test, we're using an A to F scale with S as superb. I'm going to give the Winsor and Newton a score here of a really strong A-. And that puts them right here on our big scale. The next test is the single pencil gradient. Here we're taking our pencils and making a basic gradient. What I want to see happen is the creation of a smooth and easy gradient from heavy to light. To do this, I'm going to push as hard as I can and get lighter and lighter with the pressure as I go. The easier the pencil is to control as we pull off the pressure, the more tonal differences we can see as we move through different weights. How will the Winsor and Newton gradient? Let's find out. Starting with our red pencil first, it's going down well. It's a very dense, saturated color at the higher weights, and it's pulling through the mid to the lighter end very well. Struggles a bit on the lighter end, but otherwise a great gradient. Let's try the green. It's going down very similar to the red. It is pretty smooth. However, it does look like there is a bit of a step from the high to the mid weight there. The blue pencil now. It's extremely dense at the higher weights and it's gradienting very smoothly into the light end. Like the previous pencils, it really doesn't have a super light end. We have a very similar step from the high pressure to the mid pressure in the blue pencil here. The yellow is very strong at the top end, although there is a step between the densest yellow into the mid ranges. It does seem to get a bit lighter than the other pencils, but that's a little hard to tell as the yellow is never a super vibrant color. The black starts off nice and smooth. We do have that step between the super dense to the mid-range and it progresses nicely to the light end, which again is a little light on. Let's check out our white now. Overall, as we look at how the white is performing here, we have a pretty smooth gradient. However, it still drops slightly at those lighter pressures. That white is super dense though. These pencils actually gradiented well. They do seem to be very consistent in how they put pigment down. In fact, I'd say the results here are pretty much exactly the same as our previous test. We have a good spectrum in pressure in the red, white, and black, putting down a relatively smooth gradient. It's worth actually noting how vibrant that black is here. It's one of the darkest blacks I've seen. The green, blue, and yellow gradients aren't the best as they do have a very slight drop between the high pressure and the mid pressures. The yellow is probably the worst of the 3 for that step, but overall, it's not terrible. But like the saturation and vibrancy test, these pencils suffer a bit at the light weight. I'm yet to find a wax core pencil that can get to those super light pressures, as well as an oil pencil. I'm really liking how these pencils feel to use. They are slick and comfortable, and the colors are smooth and thick. However, I'm noting that there is still a tiny bit of scratchy feel to them when drawing. Okay. Let's aggregate our 6 pencils and work out where they sit on our scale. Based on the gradients and taking the comfort and drawing feel into consideration, I'm giving Winsor and Newton a well-deserved B+ in gradients. And we're going to insert them into our scale right here. We've seen our gradient individually, now how do these pencils blend together? For this test, I'm taking our 4 primary colours, red to green and blue to yellow, and we're going to blend them. We're going to be paying special attention to what happens with the points where the colours meet. What I'm looking for is a seamless uniting of the 2 colours and if they will mix together. Blending is one of the most important things we need from a good pencil. With wax, the pigment mixes on the page and should give us a pretty vibrant result very quickly. As we put down our red, we're just creating a gradient just like we did before. Again, we've got a nice transition from a heavyweight into the lighter weights with the red. Let's go from the bottom up now with our green pencil. As we bring that green up from the bottom to meet the red in the middle, again we can see the step from that heavy pressure to the lighter pressures in that green. As they combine though, we can start to see the blending of our red and green colours here. As soon as that green hits the red, we can see the colours mixing and changing as they blend together almost into a purpley brownish colour. Let's check out our blue and yellow. Similarly to the green here, we can see that step in the blue gradient from the heavier pressures to the lighter ones. Let's see what our yellow will do with our blue now. We're starting from the bottom and slowly bringing our colour up to meet the blue. As they cross over, we can see a more intense blending than our previous 2 colours. The yellow and blue make a very noticeable and fairly vibrant green there in the middle. Not a bad result for our blending test. These pencils blend really well. As we saw, it's fairly easy overall to get these pencils to blend. We have a decent gradient that combines and mixes well in the middle to create a new colour. If we have a close look at where they meet in the middle, we can see that while some of the colours are bolder than others, they do work well together. The red and green have formed a purpley brown in the middle, but that isn't as dominant as the green from the blue and the yellow. The transition here is quite smooth and the pigment remains very rich, which is wonderful. I'm finding myself comparing these to that other famous wax-based pencil as I draw with them, and that being of course the Prismacolor. The review is here if you want to get the lowdown on how the Prismacolor scored. But I think the Winsor and Newton blend is coming out a bit more pastel in the colours than the Prismacolor. Usage-wise, I'm still finding these pencils very pleasant to use. They do still have that slight catch occasionally, which may be due to a slightly harder core, but otherwise they feel great. I'm going to give the Winsor and Newton pencils another well-deserved grade of an A- for our blending test. And that's going to put them on our graph around here. For this test, we're going to use our previously created blending test here and bring in our white pencil to combine it over the top of the colour. I'm only going to go over half of our blend so we can compare both sides. What we want to see here is how and if the white pencil changes and affects the already drawn colours. Will it highlight? Will it burnish? Will it blend? Will it make any difference? Let's see how the white pencil goes. Starting on the left with our red and green, let's bring in our white and start mixing them together. As I'm blending my white pencil with these 2 colours, I can quickly see that they're already helping to blend them together much better than they were before. It has done an excellent job of burnishing the pigment into the paper's texture, and I'm also seeing that the white is making a subtle difference on the colours, almost changing them to a lighter pastel colour. Now, if we compare that to our blue, similarly we can see that the white pencil is really blending and burnishing the colours together much better than they were before, but it's not really having a huge effect on the colour of the yellow. I'm assuming because it's already such a light colour. The blue and the green, however, is a much more smooth pastel colour after we've used the white on it. The results of this test are really going to be subjective by what you want from your white pencil. If you're looking at it as a colourless blending and burnishing tool, then it's done pretty well. If you're wanting to affect the colours beneath and make the colours slightly more pastel and lighter, then it's not too bad. But I'd say it's not enough of a change to use it for highlighting. I'm suspecting the Winsor and Newton white's primary intention is burnishing. It filled the paper texture well, and its minimal colour change is pretty much what you want for a burnishing white. Because of that, I'm giving the Winsor and Newton a B+ in the white factor. And that's going to put our white pencil here for our graph. In this test, we compare the colour the pencil puts down to the colour displayed on the barrel swatch. This test is important because we as artists don't really have any other way to tell what colour we're grabbing on a pencil other than the displayed and advertised colour on the barrel. For this test, I'm bringing in the swatch at the end of the pencil and putting it next to the gradient we created earlier. We're then just going to compare them by eye to see how accurate the colours are. Starting our comparison with the red, let's bring it in here, and I would say the color the pigments put down is pretty close in color match to our gradient. Our green now is actually quite similar to the red and a fairly good color match. Bringing in the blue, we can see the barrel is a little bit darker than the pigment put down, but it's still very close. The yellow swatch is a little bit darker compared to the pigment, but not by much. And that black, well, that black's barrel is also very close to the color the pigment put down. I think it's a pretty good match. I'm honestly not surprised that the color accuracy is as good as it is, particularly with the red and green. Across these tests, I've been watching how well they've done, and I think these are some of the more accurate we've seen. Not quite as good as the Holbein, but a really good result nonetheless. Most of the colors are very close to the barrel color, a shade darker on the blue, yellow, and black pencils compared to the gradients, but very, very close. Color accuracy is really subjective to how our eyes view color, so let me know in the comments below if you think I'm wrong, but it feels like the Winsor and Newton have done an excellent job in matching these colors. Because of this, I'm going to give them an A- in color accuracy. And that puts our Winsor and Newton right about here. Let's break some pencils. Well, the leads anyway. In the break factor, we're going to be breaking pencil leads for science. How much pressure do we need to put on a pencil before the lead actually breaks? And why would we actually do this? Well, this test is important because it gives us a real-world example as to how strong the pencils actually are, how long they could potentially last, and how consistent the cores are across these pencils. Does the brand have a consistent mix in each pencil's core to get a similar snapping point every single time? Wax pencils are often viewed as softer pencils than oil-based, and that often puts them in the lower breaking weights. But I'm very curious with these pencils. They are a more modern mix and technologies change. I'm wondering if we're in for a surprise here. Let's see, shall we? To make this test as consistent as possible across all the pencils we're going to review, I've set up a couple of controls. I'm going to sharpen each pencil to a point. I'm then going to dull them slightly by drawing 3 lines at pressure. Basically, this will make sure we don't have a super fine point that will break immediately. I'm then going to be using a 45-degree square to get a consistent angle of pressure. Makes sense? Let's go break some leads. Setting our red pencil up by taking off that point, and now let's start piling on that pressure. Okay, we're already over 500 grams and we're still going up and up, 1 kilogram, and snap! There we go, we snapped at 1,145 grams. For such a saturated pencil, it's actually surprisingly strong. Okay, let's have a little look at our green. This has also been a very consistent color and so far fairly close to the red in our test results. Right, so the pressure is on and we've hit 500 grams, 800 grams, 1 kilogram, and bang! Our green comes in at 1,032 grams. Time for our blue. Let's just take that tip off and set up our angle. Now to start the pressure, here we go, building up 500 grams, 700 grams, and again over a kilo, and there we go, 1,273 grams. For a wax-based pencil, these pencils seem to be so strong. Let's try our yellow. Sometimes I've found the yellow can be a bit weaker. Setting it up, let's build up that pressure. 500 grams, 700 grams, looking good, and there we go. Our yellow snapped at 847 grams. A little bit less, but still very strong for wax. Time for the black. Knocking our tip off and setting it up. Looks like I've taken slightly more off the tip there than the others, but the pressure's on. Already over 500 grams, 800 grams, there's the kilo, and crack. There we go, the black tapped out at 1,112 grams. Last but not least is our white pencil. Will this be a really hard or really soft white pencil? I honestly never know with the white. Setting it up and the pressure is on, 500 grams, and snap! Oh, that snapped pretty much as soon as I started at 629 grams. For wax-based pencils, these pencils are very strong. Our average break point for the Winsor and Newton pencils is just over a kilogram at 1,006 grams, which is very tough and again, very surprising for a wax-based pencil. I sort of suspected this as I've been drawing with the pencils, as they've held a point slightly longer than I'd assume a wax-based pencil would. That, coupled with the occasional scratching, suggested that they might be a harder pencil. Whatever Winsor and Newton are mixing with this makes them a very interesting pencil. When we insert them here on our master break list, that actually puts them right at the top as the hardest pencil we've reviewed so far. That's very unexpected. When we look at the consistency of each individual breakpoint, they were for a large part fairly consistent, excluding the yellow and the white. The yellow was off by a couple of 100 grams, but the white was more than half of the highest pencil's breakpoint. Strangely, because I found this pencil to be a bit scratchy throughout these tests. I'd assumed it was going to be a really strong white with a high breakpoint. Anyway, it's an interesting pencil. Either way, unfortunately, due to the massive difference here with the yellow and the white, I'm going to have to rate the break test a B for the Winsor and Newton. And that's going to put them on our graph right about here. Okay, it's time for our final test. Do these pencils spark joy or do they cause despair? This test is very much my personal opinion, which I've formed across all of these tests. Do the Winsor and Newton coloured pencils spark joy? Let's find out. Let's start at the start and work our way through. I really like the look of these pencils. They're sleek and modern and have curves in all the right places. I love, love, love the minimalist design, and while I generally like a full barreled colour, I felt like these pencils had enough colour so I could easily distinguish which ones to grab. The real silver font on the barrel is beautiful and something I appreciate after the last few review pencils' poor attempt at silver. They are comfortable and a pleasure for me to use. I was initially worried about the slim form factor that would cause me issues, but in doing these tests, they've remained consistently pleasant to work with. The tin they came in is okay. It looks great, but the shallow dividers inside mean I wouldn't leave my pencils in there for storage. The plastic covering that tin is meh. Performance-wise, these pencils were an unknown for me. I wasn't sure what to expect. Winsor and Newton has a reputation for consistency and excellence in their watercolour paint, but I was a bit skeptical that they could bring the same quality to another medium. On the whole, the tests have shown that they have mostly managed that. There are small problems with these pencils, but to be fair, every pencil has that. Across most of these tests, these pencils performed really well. Particularly in the blending and gradient test, I've also been very impressed with their saturation and brightness throughout all of our tests. They do seem to be very consistent pencils, which I really appreciate. The white is a strange pencil, pretty good overall for a burnishing tool, but surprisingly weak. One thing that has to be talked about here is that these are some of the most modern blends of pencil available. What this means is that Winsor and Newton have been able to draw upon a breadth of knowledge out there in relation to pencil creation. They haven't had to experiment like so many of the historical pencil manufacturers have. In particular, the mixes they have used for their design in their core. What we have here is a very mature, very professional pencil, something I think Winsor and Newton should be proud of. In saying all of that, I would concede yes. Yes, these pencils spark joy. I'm going to give them a really well-deserved A- here. And they slot in here on our scoreboard. Okay, now all our tests are complete. Now all we need to do is gather all the scores together and aggregate them. So for our Winsor and Newton coloured pencils, they receive an overall grade of, drumroll, a B+. All we have to do now is to put our Winsor and Newton coloured pencils on the graph we've been building. They did well, right up there with the Holbein and the Prismacolor. That's almost it for today, but I do want to add one more thing for our pencil reviews. The graphs we've been doing are really fun and hopefully are giving you at home a bit of a metric as to how these pencils actually performed. But they are sometimes a little unfair to budget pencils and others not intended to be quite so professional pencils. So, what we're going to do from now on is add a class to our rankings so we can compare how good each pencil is in a classification. We're going to have 3 ranks: student class for those budget pencils people and children may start out with, hobbyist for more advanced pencil work and those who love adult colouring, and finally professional for those top of the range pencils that you may use for your professional projects. Today's pencil, the Winsor and Newton, well and truly slot into that last section, the professional classification. Right in there with the Polychromos, Holbein, Lyra Rembrandt and the Prismacolor. Well done, Winsor and Newton. Anyway, friends, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know in the comments below if there's something I've missed or if you disagree with any of my findings. Have you tried the Winsor and Newton? What did you think? How would you rate them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're still on a 2-week schedule here, but next time we're going back to school with some super popular school grade pencils. The Faber-Castell Classic or Red Series pencils. They are everywhere, but are they any good? Come back next time to find out. But until then, if you want more stuff, have a little look at the links below. We have a very active Discord that you can sign up for. And if you want to chat, come and hang out with us on Twitch. I'm there most days. But that's it for now. Have a brilliant day, everyone. I'll talk to you all soon.